Hello, and welcome back to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and I know, I am so sorry. It has been a little too long since I have posted an episode. I am so sorry, guys. Not to make excuses, but I'm going to make some excuses. This pregnancy has been kicking my butt. Don't worry, I am due this weekend. If I don't have my baby, I'm having my baby next week. After that, I promise I will be posting regularly like I have been before, and maybe even more, because I will be on leave from work, and when she's sleeping, I'll be able to do more research. So hopefully this will be the beginning of posting more and more episodes. There could be a little bit more of a break just because getting used to a newborn might be a little bit crazy. But I am so sorry. Trust me, guys. I have been wanting to post. It's been killing me, but between work and this pregnancy, it has been tough. So here we are. We are back. Thank you so much for all of you who have been listening and have been with me from the beginning. I really appreciate it. If you are new here to HHH, welcome. We are so excited to have you. I love telling these stories from history of these horrible humans. It's just fascinating to see all the crazy things that have happened in history that people don't know about. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you do like these episodes, be sure that you are sharing with those people you know will enjoy this as well. Make sure you're liking and subscribing to the podcast so you get notifications anytime we post new episodes. I know, especially lately, when you don't know when it's coming, it's important to have those notifications turned on. So, thanks again for your patience. I really appreciate it. And other side note, I do love getting suggestions. So if you have a horrible human from history that you would like to hear about, please send it my way. I want to talk about who you guys want to hear about. So please send them. You can send them to Instagram. You can send them to Facebook, or you can just comment on this episode if you're able to. So with all of that out of the way, today's story, I know I said a different name at the last episode, but it's been a while. You don't even remember who it is, right? So we're actually going to be doing someone a little bit different. So today, our story is about a teenager whose personal choices would change the world forever and cost the lives of about 110 million people. And I know what you're thinking. There is no way one person could have caused that much damage. Well, the story of Gavrilo Princip will show you that one person's choices can make a huge difference, either good or bad, across the entire world. So he was just 19 years old when he stepped out of a Sarajevo cafe, pulled a pistol from his coat, and assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife, Sophie. That single act unleashed a chain reaction that plunged the world into the First World War. And by the time it was all over, 20 million people were dead. Empires had fallen, borders were redrawn, and modern warfare had changed forever. Not to mention that the end of World War I would actually trigger World War II. So who is this boy? Like, what drove him to do what he did? Was he a villain? Was he a patriot? Was he a pawn? You know, let's take a deeper dive and explore the life of Gavrilo Princip. Now, the most interesting part about Gavrilo Princip's story is, I mean, obviously the chain reaction that his actions caused. But in normal history, he would have just been a blip. Like, he would have been one of the many nameless faces throughout history. If you think about it, there are so many people that have lived in history that we know nothing about. He would have been one of those people because Gavrilo Princip was born on July 25th, 1894, in a very tiny village of, and you guys know I can't pronounce things right, so if I butcher any of this, just move on. It's fine. He lived in the tiny village of Oblijaj in what is now Bosnia and Herzegovina. At the time, this region was actually part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was a multi-ethnic empire ruled from Vienna and Budapest. Gavrilo was an ethnic Serb and a member of the Eastern Orthodox Church, just one group in a region full of a lot of different cultures, religions, and political tensions. So Gavrilo's home, when he was growing up as a child, was marked by extreme poverty. And by poverty, I mean poverty. They had hardship and a very strict traditional upbringing. He was born, like I said, in a very small village to a poor Serbian peasant family. So his father, Gavrilo Princip, worked as a postman, but his income was so meager and unreliable that the family often struggled to afford basic necessities, like food. That's how poor they were. His mother, Marija, had given birth to 9 children, but only 3 of these children actually survived through infancy, which is so heartbreaking. Especially with me about to have a baby, that is just so heartbreaking. And this is a pretty good reflection of the high infant mortality rate at the time because of the harsh conditions of the region. They were so impoverished in this region that their babies couldn't even survive. So life in I can't even say it. Life in the Alps was harsh. Like I said, there was hunger, poverty, and illness. Illness spread pretty quickly throughout this region as well. So this was just his normal life, was to live in this kind of poverty. Now, the Princip household was devoutly Serbian Orthodox and followed a simple agrarian lifestyle. So his father, Petar, was known as a quiet and deeply religious man who strictly enforced discipline, emphasized humility, obedience, and education. And despite the family's dire economic circumstances, Gavrilo's parents really valued learning and pushed their children to pursue schooling. And they really believed that the schooling and education would be their children's way out of poverty, which is actually pretty accurate. The more educated you can get, the less likely you will be impoverished. So Gavrilo walked miles every day to attend school, showing a really strong sense of self-determination, even at a young age. There were no luxuries in the Princip home, no books, no toys, and like I said, barely enough food, if not any food. So the hardships that Gavrilo endured really shaped his intense sense of justice, nationalism, and purpose. This stark, unforgiving environment really helped forge the radical ideas that would eventually lead him down a really dark and dangerous path. But young Gavrilo was really determined. He was described as quiet, serious, and stubborn. He was described as brooding with a deep awareness of the inequalities and sufferings around him, and he hated injustice and idolized national heroes who had fought against the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian rule. Now, the Ottoman Empire still existed at this time. This is before World War I, because this is the dude who triggers it. but he really idolized those who fought against both of those nations, especially those who would die for those nations or for those causes to fight against those nations. So his older brother, Jovan, managed to get him into a school in Sarajevo, and Gavrilo quickly stood out as a brilliant student, especially in history and literature. So when Gavrilo actually went to the school in Sarajevo, this is when his interest in politics began to take shape. He really dove deep into politics, especially during his teenage years. And like I said, this was fueled by the combination of his personal hardship growing up, but it also was influenced by historical resentment and exposure to radical nationalist ideas when he went off to school. So there's a couple different factors that actually fed into his activism, we'll say. So when he left his poor village to attend school in Sarajevo, and then later he would go to Belgrade for education purposes, Gavrilo found himself surrounded by brand new ideas of the world and a lot of unrest. Sarajevo was a city under Austro-Hungarian control, but one filled with ethnic tensions, especially between Slavic populations, like the Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosniaks, and the ruling Austrians. So there was a lot of tension, especially political tension at this time. As a Serbian boy from a humble background, Gavrilo grew up deeply aware of the sorry guys, my brain just fried. Deeply aware of inequalities faced by the South Slavs under imperial rule. So that simmering sense of injustice really followed him throughout his education and was kind of almost like a base where he started forming all of his beliefs. So in school, he started beginning to read the works of the Serbian nationalists and romantic revolutionaries. He was drawn to literature that glorified martyrdom and rebellion. So dying for your country and rebelling against those that served injustices. He particularly liked the stories of heroes who had fought against, like I said, the Ottoman Empire and any other foreign rulers. The memory of historical Serbian suffering and resistance, especially events like the 1389 Battle of Kosovo, which you can look up if you want more details about. It's something that really triggered him and were deeply ingrained in his cultural identity and personal worldview. So he really, really hated the injustices he was seeing coming from the ruling class. So he moved to Belgrade for further schooling in 1912. And this was actually the capital of independent Serbia. It was at this time that he really became radicalized. He actually joined a movement called the Mlada Bosnia, aka in English, Young Bosnia. It was a group of mostly young Slavic intellectuals and students who really dreamed of freeing their people from the Austro-Hungarian control. And these students didn't just discuss politics. They embraced the idea of violent revolution if necessary. So their ideas weren't just, passing conversation kinds of things. They were ready to act upon their ideals. They were influenced by anarchist and nationalist ideologies, and many idolized previous assassins and martyrs. So they weren't afraid to die for their cause because they saw these people as heroes and they wanted to be heroes themselves. Now, it was in this environment that Gavrilo was introduced to a more extreme circle, including members of a secret group. It was a Serbian military group known as the Black Hand. That makes it sound like some kind of ninja organization. It wasn't, I promise you, it wasn't. But these contacts gave him both the ideological justification, and eventually the means to carry out a political assassination. So not only did they reinforce the beliefs that Gavrilo were having and building, but they also had a way to actually arm these beliefs and give him the resources to actually act upon these beliefs. Now, the Black Hand, officially known as Unification or Death, was a secret military society founded in Serbia in 1911. So it was a pretty new group when he came across it because he only came to Belgrade in 1912. And they had a goal of uniting all the South Slavic peoples into a single nation, specifically all those living under Austro-Hungarian rule. It was formed by a group of Serbian army officials, so specifically the officers, many of whom had actually fought in earlier nationalist uprisings and wars in Siberian, fighting for Siberian independence. So these were people who had been military trained and had already started fighting for what they believed. Now, the group operated in total secrecy, using covert rituals, oaths, and loyalty. And they even coded all their communication, which makes sense when you're trying to rebel against the rulers over you. Members were sworn alliances on pain of death and were expected to place the goals of the organization above literally everything else, even personal survival. So the Black Hand was not a political party or a public movement. It was a shadowy underground network of military men, students, revolutionaries committed to political assassinations, sabotage, and subversion. So these people were ready for violence. And Gavrilo was now a part of this group. Now, at the head of the organization was Colonel I'm going to butcher this guy's name because it's got a lot of weird stuff in it. Dragutin Dmitrijevic. Yep, that's what we're going with. Now, by the code name, and we're going to just use his code name because it's so much easier. His code name was Apis. I can handle that. Apis. He was a charismatic and ruthless figure who believed violence was a legitimate and necessary tool for political liberation. Under his leadership, the Black Hand was responsible for numerous political assassinations. So not just the one we're going to talk about that changed the entire world, but apparently numerous assassinations and multiple terrorist acts aimed at weakening the Austro-Hungarian influence in the Balkans. So the Black Hand provided training, weapons, and ideological support for these young radicals. Now, people like Gavrilo specifically were falling into the trap of supporting this Black Hand. In 1914, the organization helped smuggle Gavrilo and his core co-conspirators into Bosnia. So they had to sneak into Bosnia, and they armed them with pistols and bombs and gave them the mission to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand during his visit to Sarajevo. This is when the story gets a little more interesting. So the Black Hand's plan to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand was both really bold and chaotic. Now, the chaotic part is probably more important than the bold part, and you will see why. So they were driven more by ideology and desperation than actual careful planning and strategy. Yeah, that is very, very true. The goal was clear. They wanted to eliminate the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne and strike a blow to the South Slavic nationalism. But the problem was the execution of the plan was super duper sloppy, amateurish, and almost failed. Like literally almost failed until a twist, the craziest twist of fate, made it way too successful. So let's get into the story of the actual assassination attempt that Gavrilo participated in. So first, why did they pick Franz Ferdinand? That's kind of important to know. So Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he represented literally everything that the Black Hand despised. So imperial control, ethnic repression, and foreign dominance in the Balkans. So they were really worried that he was going to take control because this was everything that they hated. Ironically, Franz Ferdinand was known to favor greater autonomy for the Slavs within the empire, but the Black Hand feared that his reform might strengthen the empire and undermine their push for full independence. So even though Franz Ferdinand seemed to support more freedoms for the Slavs thought that would make him too popular, so he would have more control. And they just did not want that. So they had to cut that off as fast as possible. So he was planning a visit to Sarajevo on June 28th, 1914. And this gave the Black Hand the perfect opportunity. That day was Vidovdan, and that is a sacred Serbian national holiday, marking the anniversary of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo. There's that battle again, if you want to look it up. And it's symbolically tied to resistance and martyrdom. So obviously the Black Hand is like, oh, this would be perfect. This would be the perfect day. It represents everything we stand for. This is what we got to do. We're going to do it. So the plans began months earlier when Apis, remember the head of the Black Hand, because I can't pronounce the rest of his name, he was the chief of the Serbian military intelligence, and he approved the mission. He and his associates selected 7 young Bosnian Serbs, which included Gavrilo. I would say all the other members' names, but yeah, I'm just going to butcher them, so we're just going to skip over them. So Gavrilo was one of the 7 men that were selected to accomplish or execute this assassination. So all of the people that were selected to participate in this assassination were members of the Young Bosnian group. So they had originally been young Bosnians and then had joined the Black Hand. And most of them were either teenagers, like Gavrilo, who's 19, or they were in their early 20s. So super young guys that they picked. Now, the Black Hand, like I said, had smuggled them from Siberia into Bosnia using underground networks. And along the way, they were equipped with 4 pistols, 6 hand grenades, and cyanide capsules to commit suicide in case they were captured. And they had maps, money, and false identities. So they received all of this on their way to get to Bosnia. Now, they received only brief trainings on how to use these weapons. Now, remember, these were just kids with these crazy ideals. They were idealists, they were students, and they were big political dreamers. But the reason why they were chosen to move forward with this assassination attempt was because they were reckless and they were very inexperienced. So they shouldn't have been chosen. But because they were reckless and, just these kids with these bold ideas, these were the guys chosen to move forward with the assassination attempt. So on the morning of June 28th, 1914, Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie arrived in Sarajevo. They were there for a military parade, traveling in an open car along the Apple Quay, which was the street name. It's the main street. The assassins placed themselves in different points along the main street where they knew that the royal procession would be passing. Now, this is the crazy part of the plan. Each one of them had the freedom to strike if the moment seemed right. Yep, that's right. That was their instructions. If it felt right, if it seemed right, if you felt it in the moment, go ahead and do it. Try it. Why not? That was their instructions. There was no clear chain of command. There was no coordination of their movements at all. And this lack of coordination almost ruined everything. So let's talk about this crazy, crazy assassination attempt. So here's how the morning unfolded. As the motorcade passed, I don't know what that word is, passed. Jeez, sorry. As the motorcade passed, the first two conspirators, so the first two assassins, lost their nerve. They couldn't do it. They chickened out and they did absolutely nothing. So the motorcade passes the first two. Nothing happens. The next assassin that they come across is Nedjko Kabrinovic. Yep, I can't say his name. We'll call him Ned. He actually threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but it bounced off the car and exploded under the vehicle behind it. So the next vehicle, and actually injured a couple officers. The Archduke was unharmed. And Mr. Ned, we're going to call him Ned, actually took his cyanide pill, because remember, they were given those cyanide pills in case they were going to be captured. So he took his cyanide pill and jumped into the river to escape. This is just so funny to me. This shows, this is the moment that you know that these people are very inexperienced and have no clue what the heck they're doing, because the poison did not kill him. It only made him throw up. And the river that he jumped into to escape, yeah, it was barely deep enough to cover his ankles. Yeah, he was definitely arrested immediately. So all of his efforts to escape punishment failed miserably. I just love the river part where he's like, I will be free, and it barely covers his ankles. That just made me laugh when I read it. I'm just picturing all of these events transpiring. Now, the one crazy thing to me, though, is the Archduke continued with his visit. He was shaken, but he was unharmed. And yet they continued. Nowadays, I feel like if there's an assassination attempt, they get that person out of there immediately. They run away. They get them to a safe location as fast as possible. They don't continue with what's happening because you don't know if there's more assassins. You don't know what's going on. But in this case, they're like, well, that was crazy. That car blew up. Let's continue with this parade. No question. They just continued, and he continued to greet people. Now, the rest of the group, because of what had happened, thought their opportunity had passed. They thought, okay, well, we can't do it anymore. And Gavrilo was one of those guys that was like, well, this stinks. We tried, we failed. So he was super discouraged, and he probably considered giving up because he started wandering towards a local cafe. He decided, you know what, just whatever. We can't do this, so let's go to the local cafe. But here's where things get a little crazy. Fate truly intervened at this moment because, due to a miscommunication, the Archduke's driver actually took a wrong turn right into Franz Joseph Street, which just happened to be where Gavrilo was standing on the corner. So there was the Archduke right in front of him. Driver took a wrong turn and was trying to reverse, but the car actually stalled. So picture this in your mind. This is how I'm seeing it. I'm seeing the driver turn right in front of Gavrilo. Gavrilo's brain is like, wait, that's the Archduke. He's right in front of me. And then the driver is trying to reverse, but the car's not starting. And in that moment, Gavrilo's brain is just processing, and he's like, oh, wait, this is my moment. So right at that moment, Gavrilo steps forward, pulls out his Model 1910 pistol, and fires 2 shots. One struck Sophie, the Archduke's wife, in the abdomen, The second hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck. Both died within minutes. Now, Gavrilo attempted to shoot himself at that moment too, so, fired 2 shots, and then turned the gun on himself, but was immediately tackled and arrested on the spot. So this plot to kill Archduke Franz Ferdinand was one wrong turn away from failing. It almost did not happen. And it literally was fate that put him right in front of one of the other assassins instead of turning the other direction. And it makes me just wonder, what? I'm sure they probably would have tried again at some point to assassinate him or something. Something would have happened to trigger the events that later would take place. But it's just an interesting thought to think about, if that driver had not made that wrong turn, if he had not decided to go to the cafe instead of just being like, well, I guess I'm leaving now. What would have happened in history? It's just something interesting to think about. So, anyways, Gavrilo gets captured. And while the Black Hand was a relatively small and short-lived group, because, they didn't last long after this as well, its impact was enormous. Gavrilo's choice to go to a cafe to join the Black Hand, enormous. They operated in the shadows, but its actions helped light a fuse of one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Now, they truly believed that by assassinating the Archduke, it would send a message to the Slavs in the Balkans that they would no longer be ruled by outsiders. But, let's be honest, this plan was a hot mess, dumpster fire within a dumpster fire, and just happened to work. They literally had no planning, and it just happened to work. They got so lucky. Because the assassins were amateurs. The pistols, super outdated, really old pistols. And the bombs that they threw were actually homemade bombs. And they received 0 training. They were all sick, stressed, and disorganized, and somehow they were able to succeed in their mission. But even with the success in their mission, it did not create the outcome that they were actually hoping for. Like I said, Gavrilo was arrested on the spot, and under interrogation, he confessed pretty quickly, but insisted that he acted on his own, even though the connection to the Black Hand was pretty quickly discovered. Because he was just 19 years old, this part is wild. This is wild. Because he was 19, he was too young for the death penalty under the Austro-Hungarian law. He was instead sentenced to 20 years in prison, which was the maximum penalty. He killed one of the country's leaders, and the maximum sentence he could get was 20 years. That is just wild to me. But I will say that those 20 years might have been enough because prison was so brutal back then. He was kept in basically darkness. He was chained to the wall and denied books and visitors, which, poor thing, no books, darn. He became infected with tuberculosis, which would ravage his body, and he lost the use of his right arm because of the infection. He weighed barely 80 pounds when he died on April 28th, 1918. So that was not even close to a 20-year sentence, but he died. And that was just months before the end of the Great War, aka World War I, that he started. So he was actually buried in an unmarked grave and later moved to a chapel in Sarajevo where his name is still etched on the wall. So you can actually visit where he's buried, unlike a lot of our horrible humans. Now, the aftermath of his choices, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, set off a diplomatic crisis. So if you have studied anything about World War I, you know what's coming. If not, what happened was Austria-Hungary actually blamed Serbia for the assassination, and declared war on them on July 28th, 1914, just a month after the assassination. Well, that was when the dominoes of alliances started to fall. This is the crazy part about World War I, because Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Germany agrees with Austria-Hungary and supports them. Well, Russia is like, absolutely not. We support Serbia. And then soon France and Britain would follow. So it basically was like, if you picture a little kid being bullied on the playground, and one kid says, that kid shoved me. And so his older brother is like, well, I'm going to back you. And then the other kid's big brother is like, well, I'm going to back you. And then their bigger brother is like, well, I'm going to back you. Like, it just turned into a massive fight between all of the countries because they all had alliances. And if another country declared war on their alliance, they had to also join. So that's kind of all the dominoes just fell. So the assassination plunged Europe into crisis. And like I said, Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia, and after a series of failed diplomatic exchanges, this would set off World War I, which eventually would lead to World War II. I can get into why that is, but we'll talk about that later. So ironically, the Black Hand had really hoped that the assassination would liberate the Slavs. Instead, it actually led to the death of over 20 million people and the destruction of empires, including the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and eventually the Serbian monarchy too. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot with this one. And in hindsight, the Black Hand's plan was not particularly well organized or sophisticated, but it was deadly. 20 million people deadly, and it worked tragically well. And all of this happened because a teenager with a pistol and a dream of revolution. So one person can really make a difference in this world, whether that's good or bad. And some today see Gavrilo as a freedom fighter, especially in parts of the Balkans. Others see him as a terrorist, a fanatic, and a murderer, and a symbol of how one person's idealism can actually destroy millions of lives, which, I kind of agree with. So maybe all of those things are true. It just kind of depends on the side of history that you want to look at this from. I tend to look at it from the side where millions and millions of people died because of these actions. I mean, granted, I will argue that Germany took this as an excuse to try and take over all of Europe. And then that's why they got angry when they lost. And there's a lot of resentment for that loss. And that's what led to World War II. So, there are some other nuances to this story and why so many people died. But it was all triggered by the actions of a 19-year-old and 2 bullets. So, thanks for joining me today on Horrible Humans in History. I hope you enjoyed the story of Gavrilo Princip. He was just a young man caught in the gears of history, and he was desperate, idealistic, and deadly. And whether you see him as a patriot or a monster, his acts really changed the world in ways that we're still feeling the impact today. So, if you liked today's episode, make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you turn on your notifications. It's again, like I said, baby's coming. Hopefully we'll be able to post more episodes once she's here. But turn on those notifications so you know once we are posting regularly, which will be soon, I promise. But make sure you tell all your friends and family if they're interested in history or just like true crime or anything like that. And you can make a comment on this episode or on Facebook or Instagram if you have someone from history that you would like to hear about. I would love to talk about them. Next time, we are going to be talking about the infamous Bluebeard. And I know what you're thinking. We have already talked about Bluebeard. Yes, we have talked about the American Bluebeard, but I want to talk about the French Bluebeard. There are two. I think if you remember right, I said there were two different Bluebeards. I want to talk about the second one because his story is also crazy. So tune in next time to hear his chilling story. And we will see you very soon next time on HHH. See you guys.